Supply chain is not the term which we use at our home all the time. It has not been on the media that much, but it is all around us. Impact is being felt, and White House is saying they're going to do something about it. To discuss with us is Professor Rick Geddes. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, sir.
Great to be here. Thank you.
He's professor of the Department of Policy Analysis and Management at Cornell University and founding director of Cornell Program on Infrastructure Policy. So, what is this supply chain crisis which we are hearing about?
Well, thanks, Shirtle. It's in the United States. It's a whole combination of things I think that are together. Uh, uh, Unloading ships at ports and containers is part of it. A lot of it's related to the shutdown that occurred during COVID. So there's a shortage of truck drivers, trained truck drivers in the United States. I think a number of them decided to retire during the shutdown or just not come back to work. But then there's schools for truck drivers, and those schools, of course, shut down during the COVID pandemic, and they didn't train new truck drivers. So there's this bottleneck in terms of truck drivers. They're actually making some adjustments to the age of truck drivers in the United States who can legally drive an 18-wheeler, a large truck, to adjust for that, but it's taking a long time. There's also, interestingly, a shortage of chassis. So the chassis is the part of the truck that the trailer sits on, and there's the cab that has the driver and the engine in it, and there's these sorts of shortages. So it's sort of issues and other employment issues, not just truck drivers, but it's really up and down the supply chain, Turtle. Ports, I think Port of LA in Long Beach, which has something like 70 container ships waiting to unload, gets the most attention. But there's a lot of other things, Shirtle, that are up and down the supply chain in the United States. The analogy that I've heard that you might like is that of a water hose that was allowed to dry out, and the water hose sat dry for a long time. And then when you put water through it, it might have some leaks, and it might take time for the water hose to start operating properly. So it's not just one issue. I think there's a lot of logistical issues, and of course, fuel prices are part of that. But really, I think these other labor issues are the most salient.
Professor Geddes, that's very interesting. You started talking about people and truck drivers and training, focus more on human aspect of it. But White House is playing up its infrastructure bill that is going to resolve, and they are talking about the ports and the roads and the those type of things. So, are they on the right place, or they need to balance out the human aspect of it?
Well, Malik, I think it's actually both. The infrastructure bill, of course, is going to focus mostly on sort of heavy civil infrastructure, and so roads, bridges, tunnels, seaports, airports, a whole set of things in the United States, particularly in the East, as you may know, Malik, are old, and outdated. So there's a several, or I guess a number of fairly large projects that need to be funded. I think are funded in the new infrastructure bill that would help to alleviate some of these issues. But Malik, they're going to take a long time, for these things to actually be delivered finally. One great example is the Gateway Tunnel project in the New York City metro area. It's the rail tunnels that run under the Hudson River that are owned by Amtrak, are well over 100 years old. They get heavy use during peak times. New Jersey Transit, which brings a lot of commuters into New York City from New Jersey, runs about a train a minute, I think, during peak hours. Just very, very heavy use. That is an enormous project. I've heard estimates of between 12 and $13 billion for that project. Would be completely new rail tunnels. It suffered from lack of funding. I think that'll be funded in the bill, but obviously it's going to take years for that to come online. The East Side Access, again, in the New York City metro area, that interacts with the Long Island people who are coming into the city on the Long Island Railroad, is another one. There's another one I could give you many examples of these old pieces of infrastructure that are kind of bottlenecks, and it's both freight, it's passenger rail, it's transit. It's in Baltimore, where I'm from originally, and it's an underground rail tunnel that I think dates back to the Civil War in the United States. It's way too low, was designed too low, multi-billion-dollar project that really is going to need immediate attention for rail traffic. So it's not inappropriate that the bill focuses on these heavy civil infrastructure. A lot of U.S. ports are in need of upgrades as well, as we're hearing. But that's going to take longer, years for these projects to be delivered, relative to addressing some of the labor supply issues, which can be addressed, I think much more quickly. So it's both the workers, the drivers, other people to deliver the infrastructure, but it's also the physical infrastructure itself. And I think people need to realize that the spending in the bill that the president's going to sign pretty soon is going to take time. It's going to take time for the money, the grant monies and the loans to go out and for the projects to actually be executed. So that's going to be a bit of you have to be patient, I think, with that.
So the heavy infrastructure project will take time. Of course, it's a 10-year spending bill, so little by little, and it will show some impact in the long term. But how long do you think the issues which deals with workers could be resolved? Because if that is causing delay in equipment and supplies to car makers and the computer makers and cell phone makers, that's a serious issue.
It is. It is. I think it can be. It's going to take long. A while. It's going to. I think months. So you have to train. There's been a shortage of truck drivers, for example. It's a big deal. To go to. It's a big responsibility to drive one of these large trucks. It's important to go to school for that and to get properly trained. And to bring those schools back up online. I think is going to take months. I'm not sure how long this chassis issue, of actually providing the parts of the truck, that you need, that could maybe take a little longer. So it certainly is going to be in, well into the new year, I think, before the entire supply chain, is flowing. And the other thing I like to realize is for years and indeed decades in logistics, you heard about just-in-time inventory management, how we were going to squeeze all the inefficiencies out. We were going to use computerization, et cetera, to make the logistics process very, very efficient, very low cost in moving goods. But what I think we discovered, Malik, is that it's fragile, right? When you have these real precise times of delivery, then if something like this happens, like the COVID, the system is not resilient to that. And so I think there's going to be some rethinking of sort of the philosophy, if you will, of the overall strategy, of supply chain management in light of this. But just getting out of the current sort of backlogs, I think, is going to take probably weeks or months, and certainly into the new year.
Now, COVID seems to be just going on and on and on. Right now, they're saying in Europe, there are projected to be 500,000 new deaths by February 2023. And in the United States, for a month, the infection was going down, but it has started going up. So considering, COVID survivability, I mean, it just goes on. And also the fact that we have been quite dependent on things coming from China, with whom we have a conflict. Do you think both of these factors will give rise to more production in the United States and close by areas, so we are not dependent on a very long supply chain?
I think that's right. I think there will be a trend, toward that. I mean, you have to sort of think of the whole sort of economic philosophy behind this. For decades, my training is in economics from the University of Chicago, so there was a real free trade, mentality and movement, and the notion that free trade and increasing standards of living would always bring more democracy. And many famous thinkers sort of moved in that direction in their thinking. And there's this, academically, intellectually, there's really a big sort of reassessment, I think, going on, with that and how that all works. I think an upshot of that is that probably there'll certainly be more focus on security, right? And the issues of the United States has offshored its manufacturing in many cases, just to get to the lowest cost manufacturing base. But that has basically exported a lot of defense related manufacturing, and I think that is there's going to be a rethinking of that. Separate from defense, I think there's also just going to be more of a general focus on having things produced at home, right? And so there's all these reassessments, Malik, that I think are going to take place as a result of all the revelations and concerns surrounding COVID. So I think the basic thrust of what you're saying is correct, and it's part of this really real intellectual realignment. But I think it's going to take many years. It's not going to happen overnight. There's going to be a lot of reassessments, and I really think it's going to take years or decades for that to fully play out.
Has somebody been writing or talking about the carbon footprint of the supply chain?
So, Malik, there's a huge literature on this, right? Diesel trucks, for example, almost all the trucks you and I have been discussing are diesel, and there's literature on the interactions of transportation and health. There's conferences that just focus on that, and the fine particulates from diesel fumes, I think, are widely understood to be very harmful. And of course, that's separate from climate change, right? That's just direct human health as a result. There's an enormous literature on traffic congestion, and that could be diesel particulates, but just also gasoline and other fuels that are burning. When you have traffic congestion, are very harmful, particularly to children, who are growing up near congested traffic. But your question about climate change, I think there's been a huge increased awareness, I think, of how the supply chain contributes to various greenhouse gases. And one thing, Malik, I think is really interesting is how technology, whether it's new types of fuels, electric vehicles, more improved diesel engines. I mean, it's a really quite an amazing. Hydrogen is being discussed more realistically now. It's a very interesting, type of fuel, can help to reduce the climate footprint of the entire supply chain. And we see the headline technologies, the Hyperloop, driverless cars, things like this. But Malik, one thing I've realized in studying this area is that there's sort of a quiet technological revolution going on in a whole set of things related to transportation and the supply chain network. And I think that those are, going to be adopted. Maybe the bill itself, which has some incentives to move more in the direction of at least reducing carbon and other greenhouse gases, will help to speed adoption of those and bring those to the forefront. But there really is this sort of, I call it a quiet technological revolution in infrastructure, where there's a whole set of technologies in addition to the ones that you hear most about, in the headlines. And I think that if we can get those adopted, it'll make a big difference in terms of the climate.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Geddes, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Malik. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be on again.